This is hopefully an informal conversation, but it's a delight for me to see you here today to discuss a very important topic and to welcome you and our guests on behalf of the administration at Seton Hall University for an important discussion on digital transformation, closing the digital gap in higher ed. But before we go to higher ed, I am so glad that we're discussing this today because guess what? We discussed this last week. We had a speaker on campus on Thursday who received one question from the students in the audience who said, what do you want your legacy to be as the UN General Assembly President? And the General Assembly President is someone who has a very difficult task, which is bring together and moderate 193 country representatives from across the world. And they asked him, so what do you want to do in this year? What do you want to achieve? And he had this word and the slides behind him saying, I want to achieve transformation. He also explained how difficult transformation is, and you have to look at the legal framework, processes, communities. And I was really happy because I said, this puts our things in perspective, is looking at the entire world. And sometimes we find it so difficult just in higher ed, but bringing that perspective on campus and having that global view was very important for our students, and I think it's very important also for us today to have this discussion and take this global view not only within the academy, but also outside the academy in businesses that are leading the digital transformation. He also told us something that was very interesting, which is we've always had the technology have and have nots, but even more so now, the pace of technology is so fast that we're going to continue to see a big differentiation between those countries that are able to install and implement the technologies and those who cannot. And so it's very important that we really become pervasive and intentional on how we do digital across the world. One question that I always get when we talk about, we have to do this or we have to come up with this new initiative is, but why more? Why so fast? And I really like the slides. You can't see the details, but on one side you have the socio-economic indicators and changes in the last several decades, and then what's happening to the planet on the other side. And I think even in not knowing what these individual indicators are, one is GDP, which he explained for a long time, it's not a good indicator of wealth and success or doing well. We have to bring human, social, community, and natural elements into it. But what you see is this exponential growth, that it's really impacting everyone. And so when we ask the question, why more, why faster, which I get every single day in my office, why more? Why can't we just stay where we are? We have to remember that we have a lot of pressure. But this exponential transformation also comes with opportunities opened by technology and opportunities for innovation that we can actually accelerate through technology. So if we think about COVID-19, it really actually accelerated a lot of processes that we did not even think we were ready for. Now, I know this is going to sound like a lot, but in 2 weeks, we all went online. So we were ready. We just hadn't turned on the switch. Now, it was difficult, and I know I'm talking to an audience of faculty who actually had to be in the trenches, but if we were not ready with that technology infrastructure that was already there for us to deploy, we could not have done this. So we were ready, but we had to turn on the switch. And then we started learning how to deal with technology at a fast pace. And boy, that was interesting. We were all connected 24/7, and that led us to be connected 24/7. We can't really disconnect anymore, and that comes with its own toll. So we are now rediscovering in universities that have to manage this digital transformation. How do we work in the digital, in the cloud, when we our essence is a physical space, bringing people together like us today, bringing students together who couldn't wait to be back on campus. How do we deal with that? How do we make everybody happy of this technology growth, incessant technology growth? How do we manage it? So I'd like to offer a couple of frameworks for our discussion to keep in mind. One is about the user, like the students, you. How do we deal with technology? And this is very old work, published in '91. Where is Jack Shannon? I know you probably use this in your classes, you know this very well. Actually comes from theories of communication from 1962, but it's work that talks about crossing the chasm, right? When you become a technology user, you will always find a distribution more or less like a normal curve, a normal distributions. Right there on the left, you are your innovators and early adopters, then a lot of people in the middle, and then the one who are really laggards. It's going to take more than COVID to get those to react to an online environment. And that's from the user perspective. So crossing the chasm, saying to bring people and embrace technology, you have to really be able to get into that gap. From the early adopters and the beginners, make them the enthusiasts, make the one who are going to bring this technology forward. And then from the level of organization, there is a very interesting book. This is more recent. It's from Westerman, published by Harvard University Press, that talks about not only the user, but the organization. What organizations have to do? How do you lead in a digital world? And it's a simple 2x2 matrix. Actually, we could superimpose the normal curve, and it would look very similar. But Westerman talks about the beginners and the conservatives, the very end of the two sides of the bell curve, and then the fashionistas and the digital masters, right? And the fashionistas are those that every time there is a new tech out, they just buy it. Don't know what to do with it, just buy it. We want it all. We don't know what to do with that. And then the digital masters, and he quotes a few companies there at the bottom that have become digital masters, are actually the ones who are able to use leadership, vision to actually deploy the technology. So they don't just jump in everything, but they're actually putting together vision, leadership, and digital capabilities. So if we apply this framework to, why do they do this? Because it makes sense. For those of you, I think I have some finance professor here, I think every chart that you've seen in any study always ends up like this. There is always a winner there, and the digital master tend to be digital winners also if you look at their performance in the stock markets, depending on how you aggregate the companies. And how does this reflect to universities? If we look at the same framework, we could look at some fashionistas that are the ones who jump in without knowing yet where they're going. If you've been reading about Kaplan, Purdue, Phoenix, deal also, which is underway right now, it's not clear yet if that non-profit jumping into for-profit online have a direction yet. They have a strategy. They haven't even been approved yet. So they're just testing things out. Then there are the ones who actually just mastered technology and where they want to go because their own mission is embedded in technology and what they do, or because they are so large that they really have to use technology strategically to be able to communicate and operate. And then there are the beginners, those who are underfunded, and technology, our speakers will tell us, costs a lot of money to maintain and to upgrade, so you might want to wait and see what happens first, or the conservatives that might say, well, we'll wait until the technology prices come down, or we don't accept this, we only want the on-campus, the presence, the experience, without going to the cloud. But so how do you do it well? All of this tells us that you have to have a very good relationship between where you want to go, so the mission, governance, the business vision, as well as the IT vision. And you will tell me, well, it's really obvious that those two things have to work together. Doesn't everyone does it already? And I'll tell you, no, they don't. You probably agree with me that they don't, because of the hot air balloon problem. Do you know what the hot air balloon problem is? It's a very old joke, so you might have heard it already. Anybody? where are you, right? So let me read you this joke. I'm not very good with jokes, so I can read them all. A man is flying in a hot air balloon and realizes it is lost. He spots a man down below and lowers the balloon to shout, "Excuse me, sir, can you help me? I promised my friend I would meet him half an hour ago, but I don't know where I am." Sounds like me. The man below says, "Well, yes, you are in a hot air balloon hovering approximately 30 feet above in this field. You're between 42 degrees north latitude and between 58 and 60 degrees west longitude." And then he stops. So the guy is puzzled and goes, "You must be an IT engineer." "I am," replies the man. "How did you know?" "Well," says the balloonist, everything you told me is technically correct, but I have no idea what to make with the information you gave me, and the fact is that I'm still lost." And then the man says, "You must be a manager." "I am," replies the balloonist. "But how did you know?" "Well," says the man, "you don't know where you are or where you're going. You've made a promise that you have no idea how to keep, and you expect me to solve your problems. The fact is that you are in the exact same position you were before we met, but now, somehow, it's my fault." Cheers. Right, Paul? So IT, business vision, they have to work together. And you'll see at the bottom of this IT alignment framework, this is from Jerry Luftman from Stevens, there is a word there, the skills. The skills have to be aligned to have that conversation. So one thing that we wanted to do today was to really ask our guests here to open a discussion around some of those issues, some of those frameworks, and help us answer later as we get them to the podium, some of these questions on what type of skills do we need, how do we accelerate them, or how do we refresh them? If you've been reading a lot about what's happening in the tech industry, yeah, it could have been a financial issue. They really spent too much because we had free money, but there is also an IT skills alignment issue that we have to deal with. So to open this conversation, what we like to do is to have our speakers come one by one, give an introduction on what they do and how they do it, and then bring them to the podium to answer these and other questions from the audience. The first speaker is Ashish Parmar, Chief Information Officer at Tapestry. So it's a CIO, and he's a global CIO, so his company is worldwide. He's a member of the executive committee of Tapestry. He's responsible for the group's technology strategy, leading information security and technology operations, and overseeing the data science and analytic function. Under his leadership, Tapestry was the overall winner of the IDC Best in Future of Digital Infrastructure Award in 2021, and Cloud-Centric Computing category winner. Ashish has been named as Forbes 50 Innovative Technology Leader and a top global executive on Constellation Research Business Transformation 150. Ashish, please come and join us.
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Passerini, for inviting me, and Paul, thanks again for the invite. Dr. Passerini actually was my professor many, many eons ago, so humbled to be here. I think we're going up here. So, Tapestry is a global house of brands with 3 iconic brands: Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman. I'll give you a little bit of texture about the company, a little bit of texture about who I am, and what I do, and then we'll open it up to what probably will be on the panel, some more discussion. So just shared in terms of Coach, Stuart Weitzman, Kate Spade, $6.7 billion in revenue. We operate in 70 countries, approximately 1,400 stores around the world with 18,000 employees. Overall, I have been with the brand, I'm a boomerang, I say it's two stints. I've been with the brand now over 20 plus years, or 13 years, depending on how you count. I had taken a hiatus in between, and I was offered to come back. I started my career as an entry-level analyst, so indeed a position I take with a lot of privilege that today I serve as the Chief Information Officer for the group that I started as an entry-level analyst from. Overall, when we look at our context, just to share with you, digital transformation, over the last 2 years, we are fundamentally a different organization. Our digital business is 3x what it was 2 years ago. We're a $2 billion digital business alone. It represents 30% of our revenue. We are 95% in cloud, cloud first, multi-cloud. And that's what got us the accolades from IDC. In terms of digital engagement or customer acquisition, if you want to look at some metrics from a corporate standpoint, 15 million new customers welcomed and recruited into our house of brands, and that's 15 million. And from a call to action, about 2 years ago, we announced an acceleration program. And I look at things in terms of outcomes. What is it that we were targeting? And for us, it was 3 key things: sharpening our focus on consumer, getting data to be embedded in all of our decision making and lead with a digital first mindset, and be a more responsive and leaner organization. As we look now, super proud of the work that the team has done in terms of bringing all of those things to life, where we've embedded machine learning AI into a lot of new ways of working. Recently, since this is an academic institution, Harvard Business School, MIT did a write-up on us, actually a case study that was published in Forbes as well. And we're starting to get a lot more accolades. As a culture, we've been a very quiet organization, and I often deal with that tension of when do you start to disclose, share, or celebrate. And I think I'm proud that we're coming to terms that it's okay to share, not from a brag standpoint, but really from increasing the awareness and the understanding across the ecosystem of how we're leveraging data, how we've embraced AI and ML, and not from simply automating, but really imagining and creating new ways of working. Whether it may be store allocation, which is really sending products to our stores, or personalization for our consumers, or embedding AI and ML capabilities in our supply chain visibility aspects. So hopefully we'll unpack some of that when we get into the panel. I wanted to share this slide in terms of how we look at how we operate. We've always said we want to be consumer-centric and keep consumer in everything that we do in our mind. That means operate at a speed that the consumer wants us to operate. And we coined this term as future speed. So excited to probably share and have a conversation with the co-panelists. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Good afternoon. Thank everyone for coming and spending a little time with us. So I have the distinct pleasure to introduce some of our colleagues that will join Ashish on the panel. And specifically this one, Jennifer Sparrow, Dr. Jennifer Sparrow is the Senior Manager for Higher Education Business Development at Amazon Web Services. All of us are very familiar with Amazon at Seton Hall. If you're not, your Netflix runs on Amazon, your email runs on Amazon, everything runs on Amazon. But I have a distinct pleasure of knowing Jennifer for almost 15 years. So I'm going to read her bio, but there's lots of other things I can tell you if you want to catch me in the corner. So formerly the Deputy CIO and Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning Technology at Penn State, Jennifer has championed the use of technology to engage students in the learning process for over 20 years. Jennifer's conversations around technology focus on increasing digital fluency for students, faculty, and lifelong learners. Prior to her work at PSU, she was Senior Director of Networked Knowledge Ventures and Emerging Technologies at Virginia Tech. Whew, that was a big one. She has a passion for working with faculty who are willing to push the boundaries to explore new technologies and their potential implementation in teaching, learning, and research. Her own teaching and research projects include examining the convergence of technologies and learning spaces to create interactive and engaged learning opportunities. Jennifer and I had the distinct pleasure of serving as faculty on the EDUCAUSE Learning Technology Leadership Institute for 4 years, where we had lots and lots of different conversations, and there's lots of things that she shaped at Seton Hall that she doesn't even realize. So welcome to Seton Hall for the first time, even though I've known you for so long. So let's welcome Jennifer to the podium.
Start my clock so that I don't go too long. I was putting my slides together and I had several, and I thought, boy, I need to make sure that I'm not going for 45 minutes. I don't think I get you for that long. It is a great pleasure to be here. As Paul mentioned, I have over 20 years, it's actually 25 now, I should update that. 25 years experience in higher education before I moved to AWS. I still get to work with higher education institutions on a daily basis, so it's great to see both the landscape of what folks are thinking about currently, but also how do we leverage the technology to advance the faculty, staff, and student experience at our institutions. So I'm going to focus a little bit on how I've been thinking about digital transformation in higher education from that teaching and learning perspective. So how many of you are faculty now? Good number of folks. How many of you care about students? Everybody, I knew it, right? That was an easy one. So me too, right? My passion is there. I can tell you that I have 3 children, 26, 23, and 17, and the 26 and 23-year-old were my students at Penn State when I was working there. They are your toughest critics, and they also push you to do really cool and interesting things. So they are thinking about that future speed, right? And they want you to move much faster than we are accustomed to in higher education. So we know as we think about transformation, for us, it's all about the people, the process, and the technology. We just want to make sure we're thinking about all 3 of those things, because as we go through and think about how we prepare our learners for what a 21st century digital experience looks like, there is knowledge, skills, and abilities that we want them to have and leave with. And so we want to just make sure we're thinking about those things. And we framed those at Penn State around digital fluency. So we really want students to move beyond a literacy, so beyond just the ability to understand this new way of thinking, but also how to leverage the skills to be creators of new knowledge. So for us, we wanted to think about where we're headed. And I know as a parent of college-age students, and I know my children also probably want it off the payroll. So we think about what we do when we bring our learners here to campus, and we want to prepare them for the what's next, right? They're not going to stay at our institutions forever. We want to make them we want them to leave with gainful employment opportunities and move forward from there. And if you think about that question, we talk about with our learners, our students, what is it you want to do when you leave college? And I'm guessing if you asked them this question 10 years ago or 12 years ago, they wouldn't have said, I want to be a drone operator. I want to be a mobile app developer. Maybe they did that 15 years ago. One might have to be dating myself a little on that one. They maybe didn't say that they wanted to be an AI content or programmer, or more importantly, an AI ethicist. They didn't say they wanted to be an influencer. Thank you for including the Gen X influencer on your slide, because these jobs didn't exist, right? They didn't exist 20 years ago. And so as we're thinking about how we prepare our learners, not just for the first job, but for that 4th, 5th, and 6th job out of college, we have such a great opportunity to help them with those skills that they're going to need when they leave our campuses. So what's driving our changes? We all know these things, right? 13 million jobs have been created since this Great Recession. 12 million of those are going to require a bachelor's degree or higher. And we're seeing, I think, a little bit of shift in this. I know we saw that Maryland just took away a bachelor's degree requirement for a great segment of their public service jobs. That's really an interesting opportunity for us to think about how do we help educate sort of different age learners. We know that by 2030, nearly half of U.S. jobs are at risk of automation. We're seeing this incredible shift with AI. We all are going to talk about that on the panel, so I won't spend too much time there. 5% of the jobs, this was in 2017, 85% of the jobs that in 2030 haven't been invented yet. So we're seeing these drivers going through here and making us change the way we're thinking about how we do this. And my better half is also presenting today. It's the first time we've been on a panel together ever, so we've been married 28 years. He and I debated this slide when we were looking at him on Friday. He said there's more jobs than that open, but we do know that computing jobs are the #1 source of new wages in the United States, so that job opening number is greater than that. So what is our role? What is our role in higher education, and how are we thinking about preparing our students for digital transformation, whether they're here at our campuses or they're out at these companies that we're having them, they're leaving our great halls of wisdom and moving on. And so we're not the only ones thinking about this, right? The Institute for the Future did a Future Work Skills 2020, and so they were looking at things like the larger blocks you see around here, which computational world and a globally connected world, maybe far more so than even we were before the pandemic. And the littler circles in the middle are those kinds of skills we want our students to be able to have when they're leaving here. And I love like social intelligence and a new media literacy. But also as you're thinking about a cross-cultural competency, design mindset, right? We want them to be creative thinkers, critical learners. I will leave these with you, Katia. You don't need to take pictures. Joseph Ayoun, he was the president of Northeastern. He talks about robot proof, and I love this one because I really do think this is going to come back around as we look at ChatGPT, this idea of artificial intelligence. How can we leverage it in ways that make it the best assistant you've never had, right? So what can it do that takes things off of your plate as a faculty member, as a staff member at an institution, so that you can focus on the most human things that you can do with the students, right? Those high-touch places where we want to be working with folks. Again, same thing, new vision for education, looking at these 21st century digital skills we want our students to have. And so again, as we're thinking about these fluencies, we're looking at them in a new and unique way, I think, really about digital citizenship and how do we get our students ready and prepared for these places where they're going to have to maybe use different technologies when they get out there. Maybe they're going to have to think about different problems than we've had before. So we've framed it around a couple of different fluencies. The first is creative problem solving. I'm sure you're already doing this in many of your courses, right? But this is about helping students understand what is it they need to have those inputs around the problem in order to be thinking about it from a creative perspective. Steve Hart, who's here from Adobe, I know you're going to hear from Todd Taylor as well, can talk to you about how they think about these inputs to help our learners be creative problem solvers. We want them to be thinking about creation and making. I understand you have a maker space. I got to see your beautiful student unions or student center today. What a great location, and getting students to be a part of that creating and making culture. And what are those skills that go along with that? Obviously, we want communication fluency. That has changed immensely. We talked about it this morning, going from sort of an in-person to remote in just 2 short weeks, and how we had to help our students think differently about what that looked like and how we had to help ourselves. Data fluency, you heard about utilizing data to make these very interesting decisions, and how do we leverage that in interesting ways, and what are the questions to ask of the data? One of the most interesting conversations I've had recently was with a registrar, and we said, what do you want to know? And the registrar said, I really want to know if 8 a.m. classes are bad for students. And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting question. And it turns out as we started to help him look at the data, that's not the right question. The right question is, for whom are 8 a.m. classes bad for? I can tell you, they're bad for me. And then a failure fluency. So we want students to have this opportunity to stumble and make mistakes and get up and dust themselves off and move on. So I'm going to stop there. I was only 20 seconds over, Paul. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. So our next panelist, as Jennifer said, is her husband. He has a distinct career and the distinct pleasure of having work with his significant other like I do, right? So there's only a few of us that get to understand that pressure as we go through every day. The pressure is probably the other way. She's sort of giving me the stink eye from in the back of the room. So in his role as Associate Vice President and Global University Chief Information Security Officer, Richard has leadership oversight of NYU's Global Office of Information Security and the information security program. Before NYU, he worked at Huron Consulting, helping clients in higher education and healthcare identify risks, adopt better security practices, and advance information security and privacy strategies. He's also served as the interim CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and Director of Security Operations at Penn State, where he had teams focused on security operations and privacy, information security, compliance, identity, and access management. He's firmly committed to education as the best tool to help faculty, staff, and students protect themselves and the university from emerging cyber threats. Welcome to the podium, Rich.
Just to start off with, I'd like to acknowledge that's the first time she's ever referred to me as her better half. 28 years, for sure. The other thing is I have the distinction, Paul let me know, that I actually have the shortest amount of slides, so I'll be breezing through this fairly quickly. So if you're here for a technical talk, this will not be a technical talk or anything like that. But what I wanted to touch upon was this idea of universities really being a part of digital transformation from the very beginning. And if you think about where universities were in the very beginning, most people were exposed to mainframes in a university environment, right when computing started out. When you think about supercomputing, that always happened at a university level. And when you think about the beginning of IT and the desktop revolution, that desktop publishing revolution that many of us don't even remember now, that happened in the late 80s and early 90s, that happened in higher education when we started bringing desktops into the environment. And universities were the first to start connecting desktops and start networking them. And then when the internet came along, they were the first to really support robust networking and internet access for all. I mean, so universities have been part of this digital transformation for a long time. Now, the flip side of that, and where I come in, is security has kind of trailed a little bit. Usually it's about building something great and not really thinking about the outcome if something goes wrong. And so it's not digital transformation that's the problem, it's our inability to be very deliberate about solving the problems that digital transformation might bring. Anticipating. We should never really, I should back this up and say this, we shouldn't fear digital transformation. It's inevitable. But what we should do is we should be prepared how to handle it and to pace with it. There's a lot going on in this space. If you think about cloud computing, even as my better half, I would prefer to use my better half, talks about the new products, innovations happening in cloud. We are leveraging only parts of what that can do. We haven't really fully committed to fully leveraging cloud like we can. The potential for what you can do with cloud is immense. If you think about what's happening in machine learning and from the aspects of where we are in my field and what my peers think about, there's parts that we think are going to be really great with the tools that anticipate problems and help us fix problems. But on the flip side of that, digital transformation has been happening in the criminal space as well. No longer do you have people dedicated to coding and building their own malware. They essentially are going and renting kits, if you will, if they go renting a service to leverage and do that malware. If you think about the tools that are coming to attack systems, they're going to be using the same tools that we use to protect them. So all of this is speeding up, and it's speeding up at a rate faster than we can keep up with it. One of the things, and I kind of like to go by the numbers to talk about the size of the problem, is that we are seeing the federal government for the first time really start to take notice. And it's happening globally, governments all across the globe. But one of the things that's really starting to happen is this idea that we need to protect our intellectual property better and our research better. We need to protect student data better, health information. We need to protect our infrastructure better. And so we're close to seeing a national cyber strategy emerge in the next couple months that's been in the works for a couple years since the Trump administration. And this is going to have a dramatic impact on how we actually interact with technology. The good thing is it's likely to be risk-based. So it's not saying, hey, digital transformation is bad, we can't take advantage of it, we got to slow down what we're doing. But it's going to approach the problem from certain things that are going to require us to be a little bit more careful. We should be more careful on some of the things that we're doing in this space. It's just about being thoughtful and deliberate. And just to give you a size of the problem and why they're reacting to it, that first number right there, that $7 trillion is an estimate. It's pretty widely thrown around at this point. It's supposed to be $10.5 trillion by 2025, I believe. But that's bigger than the gross domestic product in most countries. That's a significant number. And people refer to it as the largest transfer of wealth in the human history. That is quite significant. The impact is substantial. And if you think about what we're up against, is those numbers of 82% of data breaches still involve a human element. Almost 50% of data breaches are people making mistakes. So it really speaks to the workforce of how we really need to do things right and how we engineer things from the beginning, how we be prepared. One of the things we're going to talk about is really preparing students and really people for what the future will bring. And if you think about what's out there for just cybersecurity jobs right now, there's an estimate, and again, it's tough to get an estimate, from anywhere from about 500,000 to 750,000 job openings in cyber. Globally, that's about 3.4 million job openings. We just don't have the people. We just don't have the people with the skills. Part of that is this digital transformation, where higher education tends to hold on to technologies a little bit longer, maybe a little too long in some cases. It is actually not the case in business, where it's seen as a competitive advantage, and they're quickly adopting new technologies before they have fully mastered them. So part of what we have as a challenge going into the future is this idea of how do we prepare people to build better software, to engineer better systems, to do it securely. How do we anticipate how people are going to use this technology so we can make sure that we have processes in place and that we can assure that we have the right protection wrapped around data? How do we identify what's really important in our organizations that need extra protection and to make sure that we put the right amount of security around those things? And still allow, particularly in higher education, the ability to allow faculty members and students to innovate and to experiment. It's really about balancing this out and identifying what's important. A couple things that aren't in this when we look at these jobs, and it's just something I'm sure we'll talk through as we go through, are the things we need for soft skills. The idea and the alignment to business, understanding what we're really trying to do as an organization, being able to gauge risk. There's just plenty of opportunity as we look in this. A lot of this, as we go into this market, into the future for jobs around cyber, are really this generation's gold rush. And it's really up to us to figure out how we get them there and how we help them kind of bridge that gap as we go forward. Thank you.
So our final panelist is no stranger to Seton Hall. He's been here before. He is one of our strategic partners, helping us to help both faculty and students enhance and speed up our digital transformation and give our students skills they need when they enter the workforce. So Todd Taylor, Dr. Todd Taylor, is the Senior Strategic Development Manager for Higher Education at Adobe and a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Todd is an award-winning teacher and distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and currently works full-time at Adobe as a pedagogical evangelist. Very cool. He began leading instructional technology faculty development workshops as a graduate student in 1994, and his research around teaching and work continues to examine how literacy is evolving in response to emerging digital information and network technologies. So welcome to the podium, Dr. Todd Taylor. Did I do it? I didn't do it.
While that's warming up. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for the opportunity to speak again at Seton Hall. Thrilled to be here. Just think of me as Jennifer Sparrow at Adobe instead of AWS. We are both pedagogical evangelists with a background in education and transforming teaching and learning for all students. I'm going to emphasize something today that I think is important to this gap, and that's thinking about every student being a participant in this, not just specialized folks at the edge of a curriculum or degree program. I work for Adobe. We are thrilled to be one of the key strategic partners with Seton Hall. Seton Hall, about almost a year ago, became the 66th Adobe, officially designated Adobe Creative Campus worldwide. We're now nearly 70. And what that means is your students, faculty, and staff all have equal access to the Adobe Creative Cloud collection of technologies and platform to move those students especially away from being passive, disconnected consumers of other people's content toward them becoming active, connected producers of their own ideas. For those of you keeping score, here's a QR code where you can get this deck. I'm going to go through a bunch of very quick provocations at this idea of the digital gap. But for those of you thinking about the destination for your students, specifically at Adobe, most of the 23,000 employees at Adobe are in sales. After that, it's marketing. After that, it's engineering. And after that, it's operations and business administration. What I would say all of those people have in common today is that they're all digital storytellers of one kind or another. And so if I'm going to fast forward and sort of give away my final concept for the day is what I think we need to do in education everywhere is make sure that every student has as many authentic, varied experiences with data-driven and evidence-based collaborative and creative problem-solving projects as the faculty and curriculum can enable. The more we are able to do this, the more students will be prepared for a variety of contexts and situations, especially regarding digital transformation. When I look at this, especially as a faculty member, I think there's one essential skill of the information age that's been this way for a while and is not going to stop continuing. That is, students need all these kinds of experiences collecting data, information, evidence, and research so they can connect by analyzing, synthesizing, and studying the patterns within that information so that ultimately, and this is where we too often fall short, they can communicate what they found there to be actionable, to solve the wicked problems of our world by sharing, publishing, and narrating and presenting what they find. Here are a couple examples that you can look at later if you want to review this. But if I were to look at this question about the digital gap from a formulaic perspective, to me the formula is something like this. There are different kinds or different dimensions of a digital gap. One is, and in this formula it's the length, it's material, it's access to hardware, software, and connectivity. And this is on the left from the movie Parasite, and on the right is someone who really lives like this in that movie where they have to go to certain places in their basement apartment in a very technology-rich location of Seoul, Korea to get access. And the width in this formula would be the cultural or ideological digital gap, where access to digitally transformed networks of power are not shared equally. And so the Girls Who Code movement in organization is an example of someone trying to do something with that. And this is really where my focus has been, and this is where the Creative Campus focus is the height in this formula is thinking about access to digital transformation across the curriculum, in every class, everywhere you look, so that students are getting those multiple opportunities to develop those experiences and skills. And I think too often this sort of narrow definition of what it means to overcome the gap is what most people focus on, which is access to specialized cutting-edge technologies and training programs like this boot camp at MIT. These are all important, and in this formula, they are related. And I would suggest that higher education institutions like my own and like Seton Hall need to work at all of these different layers of digital transformation. I've had the great privilege of being on two governors' task force on the future of workforce development. And both of them concluded with the same recipe for student success, is that you need this variety of experiences, of knowledge production experiences, combined with credentials such as degrees and with micro-credentials, badges, those kinds of things. But it all doesn't hold together unless you have something, a narrative, that a student or an employee can use to narrate what they're capable of doing. So a project portfolio that also defines their essential capabilities and skills in a cohesive narrative creates for a robot-proof vision for the future. And to me, this is what we're going to be looking at in terms of what students will be leaving our programs with. A digital portfolio that makes a direct connection between a transcript and the abilities and skills that they have developed to have this kind of versatility. I did some chat GPT research that I won't go into about the book Robot Proof to see what it proposed as the kinds of solutions and strategies we need to look at, and maybe we'll dive deeper into that. There is also here a chart where I compared the 2015, 2020, and 25 World Economic Forum's list of the most important skills. The news here is the 2025 list is radically changed from just 5 years previously. And so I'll leave with this one final provocative thought and this QR code. That from my perspective, and of course, being a faculty member, I think of this from a teaching and learning perspective. The limiting reagent in this recipe is providing faculty resources and development. I think students are ready for this. I think our leaders are ready for this. I know the employers are ready for this. It's faculty who need the space, resources, and support to transform our institutions in these fundamental ways to help achieve closing this gap. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd. So now on to the important part. Seton Hall is no stranger to digital transformation. It's sort of hard. You know, when I think about the word transformation, it almost sounds like there's a beginning and an end, right? So, when I think about the beginning of a transformation, well, when might that be for Seton Hall? Well, for those of us that were here back then, it might be the mid-90s when we developed the first IT strategic plan. And when might the end be? Well, I don't know that there is an end. So really, I think we need to think about this more like an evolution, right? We reinvent our digital transformation almost every year, right? We're moving to be agile. Dr. Passerini talked about COVID. COVID made us completely agile because we had to. So we need to challenge ourselves a little bit more about thinking, what are the things we have to do? Maybe not for a global pandemic, but because our students need the skills, or because there are programs that we know that the community needs that we can recruit students for. Thinking about that beginning and the end and realizing that there really isn't one, that this is a continual conversation. It's continual activities of trying things, experimenting, failing, and it's okay to fail, succeed, and then figuring out ultimately what is right for the student population that we have at a given moment, or what is right from a particular college around offering particular programs, and then reevaluating that as we go along. Not very different than really what we do from a curriculum standpoint every day. So with all of that context in mind, and thank you everybody, I think we have a great range of perspective and minds on the panel today. We're going to start with one question, and then we're going to open it to the floor. There's a microphone that will pass around. If everyone's shy, we've got a couple of questions from the registration page and from some of the IT staff. But we're going to start with this one. So, and it's been mentioned before. So AI and ChatGPT have been dominating the technology news over the last several months. Where do you see the advantages and disadvantages to higher education with the investment in this technology in the commercial realm?
Katia has something for you.
Does anybody want to take one of those? Anybody want to take a first shot at answering that?
Well, since I used ChatGPT for the first time to put together my presentation, and I'm the former director of a writing program at UNC Chapel Hill, I'm thinking a lot about our first concern, usually in this setting, which is academic integrity. And of course, that's important. Well, what we're seeing here with finally artificial intelligence coming to us, I think is not a tectonic shift, it's a galactic shift. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And so I know it's going to be a potentially turbulent transition, but there is no going back. We need to figure out how to use this and how to help our students figure out how to use it in ways that make sense to combine our traditional values in education with where we know we're all heading in terms of digital transformation.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on that, and I think just from looking at it through the security lens, this has been talked about probably for about 5-6 years in the security space. And there's a lot of discussion whether it's true AI or machine learning, but the real gist of it is things are going to start happening faster and faster and faster. And part of this, what this technology is going to do, is really going to lower the barrier for people to do nefarious things with technology, to use technology against us. We're already seeing this. I mentioned that earlier in when I spoke earlier, about just renting a service to create malware. Now they're creating malware with Chat GPT. It's just there, and it's part of what we have to be prepared to deal with. The upside of that is we'll see this technology integrated into tools. The downside is most people can't afford these tools. So we're living in a world with really accelerated technology that could really do great things, but people really can't afford to leverage that technology. So there's going to be a gap between we're really ready to live in that world with all this great technology and the potential AI and machine learning, and those that are kind of lagging. And as we transfer and we kind of start that transformation, it's really going to be critical for us.
So I'll offer it from a commercial lens. I'll say if you look at it from our context, people are certainly what's making magic happen in our organizations. And we look at leveraging these tool sets to say, how do we allow you to perform at your fullest potential? There's always two sides to a coin. There's going to be inadvertent consequences where certain tasks or activities that are repetitive will get extinct. On the flip side, I look at it as an optimist saying, that wasn't your fullest potential. How do we help you unlock your fullest potential? So that's how we're rallying our colleagues, team members. On the other side, I think all the panelists that they said, whether it's the speed with which it's going to be used for wrong actions or other, those are the things we have to keep our moral compass and say, how do we stay ahead? The other part is what we're really focusing on is ensuring that these tools don't end up creating echo chambers or biases, right? Outcomes can also just start to get manifested in manner that may not be real because you just train it to a level where it just starts to show you what is that version of reality. So how do we allow our colleagues and give the space to interrogate some of these models and actually allow for what we call, peer reviews, code reviews, but from a lens of what is the vantage you're coming from when you're even allowing this to be programmed, or the data sets that you're using. So that's where, I think, to me, I look at it as very optimistically saying, it's going to bring goodness, but like anything else, too much of goodness can be a bad thing as well. So we just have to continue to interrogate it.
I would say just from an educational perspective, I've been doing a lot of reading about this. I do still teach for Penn State, and we're including a Chat GPT assignment. And it's to try and, the assignment for our students is to try and get them to get it to spit out incorrect information, and how do they verify it, right? So how do we start to give our students the tools to be able to assess whether or not the information is correct and utilized in the right ways? But as I was doing my reading and thinking about this, which I didn't think about having my presentation done by that, Todd, that's brilliant. But what I was thinking about was, I read someone say, is they comparing this to the calculator, right? So when the calculator came out, we were just going to make people, wouldn't understand how to do math, right? Now our students take their calculators in to do, their higher level math classes from middle school on, right? And so we can't imagine a world where we didn't have that capability. And so I think that we will see this become part of the way we do things. It'll just be interesting to see how quickly higher ed and education in general can keep up.
So we want to make sure, thank you. I think that, we're going to witness this very quickly. Probably, I've been quoted in the past saying Wi-Fi was probably the quickest adopted technology we've ever seen on the campus. I think we're about to witness that record get broken, because this just enables, even outside of the teaching and learning perspective, but it enables us from a business perspective. We just had a conversation this morning. One of our developers was having an issue getting some code to do what he needed it to do, and he decided to stop searching and went to Chat GPT, and it put him in the right direction. So it's very interesting. We want to open the floor to questions. So does anybody have a particular question for the panel, either to append to what we were talking about or something totally different? I would probably get in trouble if I didn't let Jack ask the first question.
I'd be happy to answer the last one. Everything you've said, I can't imagine anybody really disagreeing with what you're suggesting. I have to give Paul credit. I expected to come here and be sold AWS products. and thank God we already own many of them, so that's not a problem. What I didn't hear a lot of, and perhaps because we're not drilling into that particular topic, is an experience that we had back in the 90s when we went mobile. How do you get people to do this stuff? We had a conversation that Mary Balkin, who is one of our visionary, how's that, Mary? Good? Yeah. Probably true. We had 55 or 60 faculty on a call about what to do about ChatGPT. So we've got pockets of folks that are doing this. We've got an English professor that incorporated it into his classes over winter session. I decided to develop a use statement for generative AI products. So I asked ChatGPT, okay? But the real critical piece of this, which I did not hear, is how do you get folks to make the investment, which is substantial at the front end, to do this? And faculty is important, but I would argue the students. I'm not certain that all students understand how critical this stuff is for their future. So where's that going to come in from all of you, particularly the Ed folks? What are you going to do? What would you advise us to do to convince the I won't call them Luddites, but the non-believers, the conservatives? I think one of you had on a slide.
I like the slides that Katia had at the beginning, right? There was the laggards, I think was the appropriate term. I think that's a really interesting question, right? And with any new technology, I think I've seen it in a couple of ways. One, we saw a groundswell around the use of an LMS when it first came out, right? And we saw that because students were demanding it, right? They wanted access to their syllabus from their computers. It wasn't their phones at the time, right? I'm thinking back to the early Angel days, so I'm really dating myself. If you haven't used Angel, it's one of the older oldest LMSs. But we saw a movement from students to start to ask for this, right? They wanted to be able to view their grades. They wanted access to the syllabus. They wanted, discussion forums so that they could continue these conversations. And so, and we saw faculty that were willing to sort of get in the boat early, right? Be a part of that early group of folks that were starting to utilize this. And we saw this kind of come together in interesting ways. We had some faculty who had never used the LMS prior to COVID, right? And we made, I joked, we made 6 years worth of change in 6 weeks. So, you think about the amount of empowerment, the amount of enablement, the amount that we did support for faculty. And so I think part of this has to become both, how do we as an institution support faculty to leverage these tools, right? So what is the faculty development? What's the IT support? I'm looking at you, Paul, right, for this, right? So what are those things that we provide as an institution for faculty? And then where are we seeing our students coming into this, right? Are you asking your students what technologies they're using? Are they using ChatGPT? We asked our students the first day of class this semester, how many of you used it? And in a class of 100, we had about 40% that were already using it, right? So we knew we needed to be aware and ready, and we didn't have a statement in our syllabus about how to use this in the ways that are appropriate for what was happening. But I think we're going to find that we're going to have to figure out how to forge this together. So I don't have a magic answer. I just think that it has to be from both sides.
I would have been really surprised if you had a magic answer.
Change management is difficult, especially institutions where intellectual freedom is valued and an important principle. At the same time, my concluding thought was, how can we give faculty that support and that development? So, make a quick plug for the workshop at what time today is it?
2:30?
2:30.
2:30.
The most common workshop I lead these days is on low lift, high impact practices. Because we now have a generation of folks like Paul and Jennifer and myself who've been out on that edge and can come back and report on what is working worldwide in terms of moving from that early adopter to the early majority stage. And so it's change management. The quick strategy there is always try to focus on people who want to change, who are open, typically, not to be ageist, but that is someone who's early in their career, trying to earn credentials and be responsive to the world in front of them that they're going to be living in for a long time. And then after that, I think it's material reality. But more important than the threat of material limitation, it's finding what's important to people, finding out what's important to faculty, and showing how you can leverage these technologies to, not as an end in themselves, but to get to those ends. A funny anecdote I like to share, and I forget what year it was, 2002, we'll say, our IT was trying to get the Department of English to use Blackboard, and it was less than 15% usage. And then by some weird financial fiat, they took away all of our photocopiers and our entire photocopying budget, literally removed the photocopiers from Greenlaw Hall at UNC, and Blackboard use went to 90% in the Department of English. I'll leave you with that.
Didn't take a global pandemic. It just took the removal of the copy machines.
So I think from a Seton Hall perspective, Jack, we have been and have left a culture of really supporting trial and error and failure, and supporting it not from a staff perspective, not from a let's try and do this perspective, but from a budget perspective, right? But I think we're on the precipice now of figuring out with Katia's leadership and the obvious fondness she has for technology in getting back to doing those things that we've done for many, many years. And I'll do a shameless plug for the Teaching Learning Technology Roundtable. We have some chairs with us here. This is the work that we are working on this year, right, is trying to figure out the next steps in the university's digital evolution plan for the next two or 3 years down the road. Somebody else, Elvin?
Yes, so I don't know if you're aware of Zuboff, Professor Zuboff, and this sanctuary concept of data. She's promoted a number of things. There's an article in the Financial Times today, as it turns out, on it. But data in a university operational teaching side of the house, I mean, we might be able to keep track of the money they need to pay for tuition, books, for the registration process. But after that, there's very little data that something like a GBT could even go after. So that traded off with the sanctuary or the FERPA requirements of privacy of data. How do we round that corner on getting the data necessary to build the metrics to figure out what direction we're supposed to be going in, or could go in?
You must have been listening in our dinner conversation last night. So I'll let you talk about data and getting access to it, because I think privacy is a significant portion of what you're thinking about.
Yeah, so I think there's probably, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's really this idea of how we take institutional data and really figure out what's going on. And at the same time, there's an expectation that's starting to pick up. We're seeing it all across Europe and parts of Asia, where there's growing concern about privacy rights and things like that. So should you have the data? It's one thing to protect it, it's another thing to really, should you have it? And I think really about the future of this is really getting that data, handling it securely, putting it in a place that you can actually get the right answers, but getting a consensus of what questions to ask and what's appropriate. So there's a lot of things in the mix here, and I don't mean to dodge it. But one of the biggest challenges I have, and we had this at Penn State, when I was previously at Penn State as well, is really this idea of privacy and, who should have access to the data? And when you're not there, can you quickly remove access to the data? Because it is really, truly an information asset for every organization. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of concern, I think, at the federal level to start to give people more control over their data. And it's just all the answers aren't there yet as we try to figure it out. But I think it's really about the appropriate use of the data and really making sure you're asking the right questions. When we talk about the possibilities of what you're seeing from technologies like ChatGPT, in AI, I don't think we know yet the potential of that. I think we're just scratching the surface. I think we're really seeing probably the first iteration of a really good program that is really being widely adopted. I think it's going to get better over time. And it'll be interesting to see what they can do with those data sets as we see it, particularly as in university environments, as we work to take this data and make it more structured. Start to put together and find ways to get the answers out that we need. And that's really pairing nicely with technologies that don't necessarily need that structure. So I think there's a lot of things happening in this industry. I think there's a lot of great tools coming out to really give us answers. And I think it's happening faster than we actually have an idea how we actually want to operate and how comfortable we are with actually using some of that data.
So I'll give you a real world example. And again, when we live in this space where our careers formally kind of collided around this, right? We had a group at Penn State that reported up through the Teaching and Learning Organization that was doing that. It was looking at the data and how do we pull it into a place where we can leverage machine learning to provide some insights. And what was really interesting is we had some really amazing insights, right? About 90% accuracy, we could tell you the day a student registered for classes within half a letter grade, what their performance was going to be in that class. And that was from a variety of both student information system, student personal data, GPA, things you would imagine that would influence whether or not a student's successful. And then we looked also at faculty and the course, right? So how many times had the faculty taught the course? What was their average course grade, right? There were a lot of different factors that were brought in, about 72 different variables that were brought into this. But we worked closely with the privacy office on, who should have these insights when we get finished, right? Because we don't want this to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We don't want students to see, I'm going to get an F, why do I even bother, right? We didn't want faculty to necessarily have that and discount students in their course. So who gets the data? What data should we be utilizing? And then we engaged the ethics office as well. So we had a Rock Ethics Institute at Penn State, and we asked them, should we be including things like gender, socioeconomic status, right? There were some really interesting questions, and does that inherently make the algorithms biased, or does it make them better and allow us to provide better insights? I will tell you, we took this to the former provost, and he just said, I need you not to talk about this anymore. Like, it was so, I'm not kidding, right? Because there were things that we were gonna have to, now we have a whole set of ethical things we need, if we know a student's not gonna be successful, should we provide them the right, are we providing them the right interventions? Are we getting to them at the right time? Should we still take their money for these courses, right?
Create a liability almost in a sense.
Are we creating a generation of students who won't be able to have that failure fluency, right? So there were a whole lot of things that went along with this. And so we weren't as an institution prepared to address the insights that we were getting. And so I think that's going to be the heavier lift, is not getting the data to where it needs to be, but how do we as an institution respond to those insights that we've gotten?
So just building on some things that Rich said and what Ashish mentioned earlier around developing the questions that you want to ask. Ashish, I don't know if there's something you can bring from the commercial side of things on how you all developed the questions you wanted to answer, and then later on.
Yeah, there is no magical way, but I think it's heavily a test and learn, and being open to. Internally we call it showing up with a spirit of inquiry versus advocacy. Mm-hmm. So how do you keep the inquiry always active, saying this is what we're approaching? The notion, which is very fascinating, because I think we're all dealing with that same. You don't want it to be self-fulfilling. So we can apply some of that to a customer. We could actually look at it and say, can I predict a customer journey? Could I actually look at a lifetime value? But you also need to be really mindful that you end up, again, go back to the echo chamber. You will probably end up bringing it to life by actually leaving a cohort behind. And I think that's a tension that we're all dealing with. It's not a problem. I often say tensions need to be managed, and we're trying to figure this out ourselves right now. But what I will offer is, what's fascinating is the amount of co-creation that's happening within commercial space and academia. We recently did this research project, as I was mentioning before, with Harvard and MIT, and some of the professors are actually coming to our offices tomorrow. And it came back to, when we're building these models, there was a write-up done about us, and the nutshell from Forbes was the notion of trust. How do you ensure that if you're saying this is being done to achieve an outcome, and the outcome is really for a betterment of X, there are stakeholders involved in it. And how do you ensure that it doesn't just become a data science project or the mathematical modeling, but really bringing those stakeholders back and now interrogating it, and how do you continue to establish the trust? I'll send the link later, but it's that first foray into it, and the model that we applied was around store allocation. So simplistically speaking, it's the product depth, the inventory or the breadth, the assortment that you're sending to a store, and how do we apply ML or AI to get the most effective outcome there. And from the highest level, it can appear that we're taking individuals that are doing this job, their job away, or hey, there comes a science project that's going to go. And we studied this to say, how do you ensure that you also don't start to curate or create a model that starts to exclude someone just because you've got a bias in that model? So those are the things we're approaching it. I mean, look, I'm always energized when I come to academic settings and learn that we're all trying to figure this out. And I think you guys are going to be at the cutting edge. As much as you are hard on yourselves, I think the notion that you're actually interrogating this from various angles gives us ideas. We may have a little bit more speed or less patience to wait, and we just go do it. That's the dichotomy.
Less patience is a good way to
That's the dichotomy.
Paul, I want to add one real
Yeah.
quick idea out there. I echo everything that's been said, but I also want to add that our students desperately need a matrix of experiences telling data stories, understanding how analytics work, understanding how algorithms work, learning how to do evidence-based reasoning in all kinds of contexts, in all kinds of majors. And without that, they are not digitally fluent or digitally literate or digitally agile today. It's a fundamental learning outcome that every student needs multiple experiences with.
Great, thank you. So we still have time for one or two more questions. Is there anybody else that has a particular question, sir? There's a microphone right behind you.
Oh, thank you. An esoteric question. I mean, maybe it's out of line, maybe it isn't. But thinking about, all the years when I was reading this Brave New World, 1984, that was in high school. Half of this stuff was science fiction also.
Yeah.
What world are we really headed to? When you read some of those greats of science fiction, they're warning us of that Brave New World. Are we heading to something great, or we're headed to something as bad as was predicted in 1984, Brave New World, or The Matrix later, Soylent Green, whatever you want to look and read at? The only positive science fiction really out there is Star Trek and Roddenberry. That's about it. But the rest is very dark, right? What is your answer, our great technologists? Thank you.
Who wants to tackle that one? Star Trek was what popped into my mind, and I will end this with Live Long and Prosper, but who wants to tackle that one?
I'll just
Excellent.
start off by saying I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think we're going to see wonderful things come from this technology and the potential of it, and the ease of use really is what we're talking about, is the ease of use. And then people that have great ideas can use this technology and use it as a tool to leverage to do good things. We've seen that all throughout mankind. But there's the other side of this. And the reality is that we've seen this as technology has come along, that people will misuse it. And there's another part of it. It's just, I think the key part of this is we just need to be prepared to really keep up with it, to really identify what's important to us as far as how we would appropriately use this technology, and really discourage the technology not to be used inappropriately. But the reality is it's out there already. And once it's out there, it's out there. So we just need to really kind of do the best we can to put out good digital citizens that are going to do things appropriately.
I think the hard answer is us. We are the ones in institutions of higher education that will bring. Jen started to talk about the ethical use of this technology. Jennifer, I don't know if there's something that you have an example of or anything like that, but this isn't the first time, right? We all started off with our StarTAC flip phone from Verizon, right? And it was right out of Gene Roddenberry's vision. And that's used, while sometimes, I get my spam calls on there now, it's used for evil as well, but far more good has come from those technologies that we might have first saw in the 1960s TV series than evil. But there's always going to be those people that are taking advantage of it. So I don't know if anybody else has any.
I don't know if the human condition is going to improve or not. I will say that what those science fiction futurists saw, such as the cyberpunk data cowboy, has become an absolute reality. I will say that I'm pretty sure that whatever's going to happen is going to keep happening faster, and it's going to be dizzying.
I think that's the motivation for us to get on board and figure out how we want to show our students to use it for good. Sarah?
I just want to say, Seton Hall is already doing this. I have two boys, 10-year-olds, who are very into video games, and they went to Seton Hall's esports camp this summer. And I was really excited about that program because they not only tell the students, how to be most competitive in the various games that they play, but they also talk to them about the ethics of their online persona and how sportsmanship and ethics don't stop in the digital space. So just wanted to throw that out there that it's already happening.
Thank you. Good job, Victor. Our esports managers in the room. All right, we have time for one last question. We're just a couple minutes over, but that's okay. Anybody? Mary B?
Hi, thanks. I'm actually going back to the students because I realize, yes, it's a challenge to get faculty to tool up, to change the way they do things. But especially here, I don't think it's as hard as we think. I do think one of the biggest challenges is, in fact, our students. My first night of class, I mentioned ChatGPT. I have a class of 26. 8 of them had never heard of it. And they were being honest. They looked completely befuddled when I was mentioning it. And I do have a line on my syllabus, in fact, about it, very broad, but So my question is, in fact, English, by the way, is my area, and especially in the humanities, getting students to understand why this is important to them. I think credentialing is a big issue. Students in the humanities do not tend to think about, I say you can get a LinkedIn Learning credential or something else, and they're like, huh? Right? So it's just not part of the culture of at least English. I can speak to my own discipline. And by the way, I don't think the retooling is necessarily going to be for an older population. I think our students are going to need to be retooling from the minute they graduate, right? I mean, an English major has, in many cases, not done much. I mean, a lot of us do digital projects. As Jack mentioned, the person who's doing the ChatGPT assignments in English is certainly, on the leading edge of the curve. But anyway, my question is about what do our students need to do to prepare? How do we help them prepare? And how do we, in some cases, convince them that this is the world they're entering is very different from the world that they live in right here?
Who's first?
Well, as the English professor.
There you go.
There's a webinar that I'm a part of from the Chronicle of Higher Education on February 23rd about the myth of the digital native. I think when we think about our students in this regard, we want to be sure we're not focusing on the early adopters and the innovators who've had all the opportunity and the privilege and the technology and they're comfortable, because if students aren't exposed to these realities and experiences, they're going to be left behind. And being a humanist and being brought up in that tradition, there's some references in my slide deck to what the author of Robot Proof calls humanics, the future of the humanities, and it has to do with these ethical dimensions and creative problem-solving dimensions. And it was interesting when we started putting a digital component into the major in a traditional department at UNC. The communications department got all up in arms and said, "What are you doing talking about media?" We said, "We're not talking about media, we're talking about storytelling. Is it okay if the Department of English talks about digital narratives and digital storytelling?" And they had nothing they could say to that. And so from my perspective, if the future of humanity is at stake here, who better than humanists to ride that wave and to be at the leadership of that? And who better to tell digital stories than folks raised in that tradition? And so I think the role of humanities, if we think those students don't belong and don't naturally adhere to this, I think that's a very destructive myth that we want to fight.
I'll go back to something Ashish talked about a little bit earlier, but I'll frame it in a Ted Lasso reference. We need our students to be curious, not judgmental, right? And so if we can help our students find that curiosity, whether it's in the technologies they're using, in the disciplinary studies they've got, or when they get out into their post Seton Hall time. What is it that they're going to be doing for a career? That curiosity will serve them well to think about these technologies, these emerging problems that we have differently.
So many different programs. My question is, do colleges, universities provide almost informational how-to sessions, not necessarily courses, on all the different new technologies that they should at least have some awareness of, some practical use in? That's my question.
I think increasingly universities like Penn State, like UNC, like Seton Hall, are looking at this very issue. And what most people find is that training students in a closed skill, a capacity, here's how to use Excel, here's how to use ChatGPT, doesn't go very far. What you want to do is train them in a contextual situation to explore a technology to solve a problem in that class, in that methodology. And then by having a variety of those experiences, because these technologies are leapfrogging each other so fast, you're not going to teach someone to master software anymore. You're going to help them develop the capacities to learn different applications and solutions as they're emerging. And so I think the best we can do is what I suggested at the beginning. We can give students as many different opportunities as we can to use these technologies to creatively solve problems, so that they develop the fluencies, the intuitions about how to learn a software program that hasn't even been invented yet.
I think the key is with the faculty, right? That's the motivation to learn the technology, and it's up to us to make sure we have the support behind the student and the faculty member to work that all the way through. So they're not sitting in their dorm room, by themselves trying to figure out a piece of technology.
If I may, I was just going to share a couple of data points. If you look at our team and their backgrounds, we have a lot of very senior professionals who actually came from humanities background, and they're amazing storytellers, or they just have this amazing way of capturing what a user experience ought to be. Who would have ever thought that we would be actually specializing in the notion of user experience when you're interacting with digital technologies? So, I often find it pretty fabulous when I spend time with our team members where, there's a place for everyone, of course. There is the hardcore engineers who are just saying, I solved it. But then how do you bring it to life? How do you put emotion to it? We have marvelous individuals who are coming from history background, humanities, or completely different, where you would have never thought, a creative artist background, who's now embracing tech to say, how do I bring this to life? The other part is, personally speaking, I went to school for operations supply chain. I did my master's at NJIT, but in management, with an emphasis in information tech, and just had an affinity to it. So I think the world's also changing in terms of, it's not this one vertical ladder that you've chosen this and you're going to be. I was doing a conversation internally with our legal professionals and team members there, the notion of intellectual property. And I think we haven't even broached that topic of metaverse and other stuff. Like, what is intellectual property? How do you weave in the legal side of the world with tech? So we from outside in would say, continue, I think Beth said before, continue to give varied experiences and just educate in terms of keeping a wider perspective of the skills you're learning, but embracing tech to bring whatever your craft is to life, right? And to the fullest potential you have. And I don't know what the full potential for someone is, because hopefully they don't know, they have never reached that full potential as yet. So how do you continue to push that and say, what you did yesterday was good enough, today is the baseline?
Good. I wanted to take the occasion to thank again our panelists here. Wonderful conversation. Thank everyone from the audience, and close on a positive note of on our students. I I've always found it fascinating. After I don't teach for 2-3 years, I'm always in a panic mode because, oh my gosh, I don't know the technology anymore. What am I going to teach? And I need to freshen up on this and that and that. So the last time that I taught 3 years ago, I think it was digital entrepreneurship, and I was looking at what's PayPal today? How do they do a digital web store? And I was getting so panicky because I'm like, how do I teach them that? And all I had to do is tell them, you have to bring your digital web storefront, come up with the business model, and sell your product. And all I had to do is tell them, go, do it. And they'll figure it out. All we have to do is give them the tools. Going back to your question is, do they have access to the technology? Well, thanks to these partnerships, yes, now they can access it for free, and there is a lot of free stuff on the net. And then we need to let them explore. And then when we bring them to the classroom, we have to give them constructive feedback and keep their curiosity going and say, well, maybe you could have done it like that. So I think there is a lot of hope out there, and I think that continuing those partnerships like with you, with products that will help our students and letting our students go free, it's a great opportunity. So thank you for being here today. I hope you'll have an opportunity to speak with our guests for a little bit before you go, or to participate in the events this afternoon, because our students are going to have some opportunities to learn more technologies as well as our faculty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.